My name is Samantha Brooks, and at 29, I discovered that my entire family had conspired to kill me for my life insurance policy. Standing on a hillside overlooking St. Mary's Cemetery, watching my own funeral procession, I realized that the people who raised me valued me at exactly $2 million. Dead. The Brooks family had always been obsessed with money, though we'd never had much of it. My father, William Brooks, was a small-town insurance salesman in Cedar Falls, Iowa, who spent 40 years watching other people get rich while he struggled to make ends meet. My mother, Patricia, worked as a bank teller and knew exactly how much money everyone in town had, and how much they didn't. My older brother Kevin was a mechanic who'd inherited Dad's resentment about never having enough money. My younger sister Ashley had expensive tastes and no realistic plan for affording them. Together they formed a family unit united by financial frustration and a shared belief that the world owed them more than they had. I was different. Maybe because I'd been fortunate enough to receive an academic scholarship to Iowa State University, I'd seen a world beyond Cedar Falls' financial limitations. I studied computer science, landed a well-paying job at a tech company in Des Moines, and built a life based on my own achievements rather than resentment about what I lacked. This difference made me both valuable and resented within my family. Valuable because I could help them financially when they needed it. Resented because my success highlighted their failures and made them feel inadequate by comparison. The life insurance policy that would eventually motivate them to murder me had been purchased 5 years ago as part of a benefits package at my company. As a single 24-year-old with no dependents, I designated my parents as beneficiaries without much thought. It seemed like a standard precaution. Who expects to die young and single? The policy was substantial. $2 million in coverage designed to attract talented young professionals to the company. I'd mentioned it to my family in passing, thinking they'd be reassured to know I was financially responsible. I had no idea I was signing my own death warrant. The first sign that something was wrong came 18 months ago when my family's financial pressures reached a crisis point. Dad's insurance agency was failing due to competition from online providers. Mom had been laid off from the bank during a merger. Kevin's auto repair shop was struggling because newer cars required specialized equipment he couldn't afford. Ashley had accumulated $40,000 in credit card debt pursuing an Instagram influencer lifestyle she couldn't sustain. During a family dinner, they presented their problems to me as a collective crisis requiring my intervention. "We need help, Samantha," Dad said, sliding a stack of bills across the dining room table. "The business is failing, your mother's unemployed, and we're about to lose the house." I studied the numbers. Mortgage payments, credit card bills, business loans, and Ashley's shopping debts. The total was staggering, nearly $180,000 in combined family debt. "I can help with some of this," I offered, calculating what I could afford from my savings. "Maybe $25,000 to get you caught up on the mortgage and—" "25,000? Kevin interrupted, laughing bitterly. "That's nothing compared to what we need. You make more in 6 months than any of us make in 2 years. Mom leaned forward, her expression manipulative in a way I'd learned to recognize. "Honey, you know we've always supported your success. When you wanted to go to college, we encouraged you even though we couldn't afford to help. When you moved away for that job, we were proud even though it meant losing you. And now we need our family to support us," Ashley added. "Just like we supported you." I felt the familiar weight of family guilt settling over me, but something about their presentation felt orchestrated. The way they'd coordinated their talking points, the specific dollar amounts they'd prepared, the emotional manipulation. It felt more like a business presentation than a genuine cry for help. "I'll think about what I can do," I said finally. "But I can't solve everyone's financial problems. You each need to make some difficult decisions about spending and debt management." The disappointment in their faces quickly shifted to something colder. I realized they hadn't come to me for help. They'd come expecting a complete financial bailout, and my offer of partial assistance was being interpreted as rejection. Over the following months, their requests for money became more frequent and more aggressive. Dad needed cash to keep his business afloat, just until things turned around. Mom required help with medical bills from a procedure she claimed was urgent but wouldn't discuss in detail. Kevin's shop faced bankruptcy unless I invested in new equipment. Ashley's debt was growing due to interest charges and late fees. Each time I provided what help I could afford, $5,000 here, $3,000 there, but it was never enough to solve their underlying problems. More concerning was their growing resentment when I couldn't provide everything they wanted. "It must be nice to have so much money that you can pick and choose who deserves help," Ashley said during one particularly tense conversation. "Some of us weren't lucky enough to be born smart enough for college scholarships." "You could have applied for scholarships too," I pointed out. "You chose to drop out of high school instead." "Not everyone gets to be the perfect daughter who can do no wrong," she shot back. These family tensions escalated when I started dating Marcus, a software engineer who shared my career focus and financial responsibility. My family immediately viewed him as a threat, not to me but to their access to my money. "He's changing you," Mom complained after Marcus and I had been dating for 6 months. "You're becoming selfish and materialistic just like him." What they really meant was that Marcus encouraged me to set boundaries around my family's financial demands. He'd grown up in a healthy family dynamic and was shocked by the way my relatives treated me like a personal A-team. "Sam, you're not responsible for solving your family's financial problems," he said after a particularly draining dinner where they'd spent 2 hours detailing their various crises. "They're all adults who made their own choices. You can help them occasionally, but you shouldn't be expected to fund their lifestyles." Marcus's perspective gave me the courage to start saying no to some of their requests. When Dad asked for $15,000 to save his business, I offered to help him develop a realistic business plan instead. When Ashley wanted me to pay off her credit cards, I suggested debt counseling services. When Kevin needed new equipment, I recommended business loans and equipment financing. These alternative suggestions were met with anger and accusations that I was abandoning my family in their time of need. "We raised you," Dad said during one heated argument. "We sacrificed for your education and your success. Now that we need help, you're too good for us." "I've given you over $40,000 in the past year," I replied. "That's not abandonment, that's significant financial support. But I can't bankrupt myself to solve problems that require fundamental changes in your spending and business practices." That argument marked a turning point in our relationship. My family stopped asking for help and started treating me with cold politeness during my visits home. They made subtle comments about my selfishness and my boyfriend's bad influence. They began excluding me from family gatherings and conversations, claiming they didn't want to burden me with their problems since I clearly had more important things to worry about. What I didn't realize was that they had moved past asking for my money to planning for my death. The insurance fraud scheme began taking shape about a year ago, though I wouldn't discover the evidence until much later. It started with seemingly innocent questions about my work life, my travel plans, and my health insurance coverage. "How's your job security?" Mom would ask during phone calls. "I worry about you young people in those tech companies. I hear they lay people off all the time." Dad started making comments about my life insurance policy, claiming he was proud that I was being financially responsible. "It's smart to have good coverage at your age. You never know what might happen." Ashley began asking about my social life and whether I was planning to get married soon. "If something happened to you, would Marcus inherit everything? Or would it still go to family?" I interpreted these questions as normal family concern, not reconnaissance for a murder plot. The first concrete step in their plan was Kevin's suggestion that I join him on a brother-sister bonding camping trip to Devil's Lake in Wisconsin. Kevin had never shown interest in bonding with me before, but he claimed he wanted to repair our relationship and get away from the stress of his financial problems. "Just the two of us," he insisted. "Like when we were kids. We can hike, fish, and actually talk without all the family drama getting in the way." I was touched by what seemed like a genuine attempt to reconnect, so I agreed to the trip despite my busy work schedule. What I didn't know was that Kevin had spent weeks researching the area, looking for remote locations where a staged accident would be plausible. Devil's Lake had dangerous cliff areas, deep water, and enough wilderness that a body might never be recovered. The trip was planned for a weekend in early October when the weather would be unpredictable and hiking conditions potentially treacherous. Kevin had researched local emergency response times and knew that help would be slow to arrive if someone were to have an accident. 2 days before our planned departure, I was working late at the office when I received a call from Ashley, sobbing hysterically. "Sam, it's Kevin," she cried. "He's been in an accident. He's in the hospital and it's really bad." My heart stopped. Despite our recent family tensions, Kevin was still my brother. "What happened? Which hospital?" Cedar Falls General. Please come now. The doctors say, they say it might be too late. I dropped everything and drove the 3 hours to Cedar Falls, arriving at the hospital around midnight. I found Ashley and my parents in the ICU waiting room, all looking devastated. How is he? I asked immediately. Dad looked up with red-rimmed eyes. Car accident on Highway 20. Drunk driver hit him head-on. He's been in surgery for 6 hours. For the next 3 days I stayed at the hospital while Kevin fought for his life. The doctors said his injuries were severe. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, brain trauma. The family gathered around his bedside, taking turns holding his hand and telling him to fight. During this vigil something strange happened. My family's attitude toward me completely changed. The coldness and resentment that had characterized our recent interactions disappeared, replaced by desperate neediness and affection. I'm so glad you're here, Mom said, hugging me tightly. I don't know what we'd do without you. You're the strong one in this family. We've been terrible to you lately, Dad admitted. We were so focused on our problems that we forgot what really matters. Family is everything. Ashley was the most dramatic in her transformation. Sam, I need you to know that I love you so much. You're the best sister anyone could have. If something happens to Kevin, you're all I have left. Their sudden affection felt genuine, and I was moved by what seemed like a family crisis bringing us closer together. I took emergency leave from work to stay in Cedar Falls and support them through Kevin's recovery. Kevin survived the surgery and slowly began to improve, though his recovery would take months. During this time I found myself naturally taking on the role of family coordinator, managing his medical care, communicating with insurance companies, and helping my parents navigate the crisis. Thank God for you, Mom said repeatedly. I don't know how we'd handle this without your education and your ability to understand all these medical and insurance matters. What I didn't realize was that Kevin's accident, which was real, had given my family the perfect cover story for their insurance fraud scheme. They had learned during his hospitalization exactly how insurance investigations worked, what kind of documentation was required for death benefits, and how accidental deaths were processed differently from natural deaths. More importantly, they had observed my response to family crisis and realized I would drop everything to support them when they needed me. This information became crucial to their planning. Kevin's accident had also created genuine financial stress that made their need for money more urgent. His medical bills were substantial, his business had failed during his hospitalization, and the family's collective debt had grown even larger. My $2 million life insurance policy now looked like the only solution to their financial problems. The planning intensified once Kevin was released from the hospital in December. He was still recovering but mobile enough to participate in family discussions about their financial future. During one of these conversations, someone, I was never able to determine who, first suggested that my death would solve all their problems. According to later evidence I discovered, they initially considered making my death look like a suicide, playing up the stress I was supposedly feeling about their family crisis and my demanding job. But Dad's insurance background made him realize that suicide investigations were thorough and that the policy might not pay out if they couldn't prove my mental state was compromised. They settled on staging an accident instead. The camping trip Kevin had originally proposed was revived, but now with sinister intent. They would arrange for me to have a hiking accident at Devil's Lake, with Kevin as the sole witness to testify that I had fallen from a cliff while taking photos. The plan required Kevin to have recovered enough to be believable as a hiking companion, but not so recovered that his own physical limitations would be questioned if he claimed he couldn't rescue me. His recent hospitalization would also explain why he might be slower to seek help. He was still dealing with his own trauma and injuries. What made their plan particularly clever was that my death would solve multiple problems simultaneously. The life insurance payout would cover all their debts and provide substantial money for their futures. Kevin's medical bills would be paid. Dad could restart his business. Ashley could continue her lifestyle without accumulating more debt. From their perspective, sacrificing one family member to save 4 others was a reasonable trade-off. The final piece of their scheme involved creating the appearance of a close, loving family so that my death would generate maximum sympathy and minimal suspicion. They began inviting me to family gatherings again, expressing gratitude for my support during Kevin's crisis, and making sure our social media accounts showed a happy, united family. "Let's take a family photo," Ashley insisted during one dinner. We need to document this time when we're all together and Kevin's recovering. These moments are precious. She posted the photo on Instagram with a caption about family love and support, creating digital evidence of our supposed closeness. Similar posts appeared on all their social media accounts, painting a picture of a tight-knit family that loved and supported each other. This social media campaign would serve two purposes. First, it would make my eventual death seem more tragic and unexpected, generating sympathy for my grieving family. Second, it would provide evidence that I was emotionally stable and happy, making suicide seem unlikely and accidental death the most plausible explanation. The camping trip was rescheduled for late February, ostensibly to celebrate Kevin's recovery and my dedication to the family during the crisis. Kevin claimed he wanted to prove to himself that he could still enjoy outdoor activities despite his injuries. "This trip means everything to me," he told me earnestly. "After being stuck in a hospital bed for months, I need to feel alive again. And I want to do it with my sister who saved my life by being there for me." I was touched by his apparent gratitude and agreed to the trip, even though February weather in Wisconsin would be harsh and potentially dangerous. Kevin assured me he had researched the conditions and found trails that would be safe for someone in his condition. What he had actually researched was how to stage my death and remove my body so it would never be found. The trip was planned for a 3-day weekend when the weather forecast predicted snow and cold temperatures, conditions that would limit the number of other hikers in the area and provide an explanation for why an accident might not be discovered immediately. I took Friday off work and drove to Cedar Falls Thursday evening, planning to leave early Friday morning for the 4-hour drive to Devil's Lake. The family gathered for dinner to send us off, and everyone was unusually emotional about what should have been a routine camping trip. "Be careful out there," Mom said, hugging me tightly. "Come back safe." Dad shook Kevin's hand solemnly. "Take care of your sister. She's precious to all of us." Ashley gave me a long hug and whispered, "I love you so much, Sam. You're the best person I know." Their excessive emotion should have been a red flag, but I interpreted it as lingering trauma from Kevin's accident, making them more aware of how quickly tragedy could strike. What I didn't know was that they were saying goodbye to me for the last time. Early Friday morning, Kevin and I loaded our gear into his truck and began the drive to Devil's Lake State Park. Kevin seemed nervous during the drive, making awkward conversation about the weather and repeatedly checking his phone. "Everything okay?" I asked. "You seem anxious." "Just excited," he replied. "And a little nervous about hiking again after the accident. But the doctors said physical activity would be good for my recovery." We arrived at the park around noon and checked into our campsite. The weather was cold but clear and there were few other visitors due to the season. Kevin immediately began discussing our hiking plans for the afternoon. "I want to show you the viewpoint at the South Shore," he said, pointing to a trail map. "The views are incredible and it's not too strenuous for someone in my condition." What he didn't mention was that the South Shore Trail included several cliff areas where a fall would be fatal, and the remote location would give him time to stage the scene before seeking help. As we prepared to begin the hike that was supposed to end my life, I had no idea that my brother was planning to push me off a cliff and tell everyone I had slipped while taking photos. But sometimes the best-laid plans encounter unexpected complications. And Kevin was about to discover that killing your sister is more difficult than it appears in the planning stages. The discovery that my family was planning to kill me came not through dramatic confrontation, but through a carelessly unlocked phone and a bathroom break that changed everything. We had been hiking for about an hour when Kevin claimed he needed to rest due to lingering effects from his accident. We stopped at a scenic overlook and Kevin sat heavily on a fallen log, breathing harder than the moderate trail should have warranted. "I need a few minutes," he said, pulling out his phone. "And I should probably check in with Mom to let her know we made it safely." I walked a short distance away to give him privacy for the call, taking photos of the lake below. The view was spectacular, deep blue water surrounded by snow-dusted cliffs and winter bare trees. It would have been a perfect day for hiking if not for the underlying tension I was beginning to sense in Kevin's behavior. After about 10 minutes, Kevin announced he needed to find a bathroom, though we were miles from any facilities. "I'll be back in a few minutes," he said, heading into the woods. "Wait here, don't wander off." He left his phone on the log where he'd been sitting. The screen was still active, showing the end of a text conversation. I wasn't intending to snoop, but a message preview caught my eye that made my blood run cold. Supposed to happen at the cliff viewpoint. Make sure she's close enough to the edge when you... The message was cut off, but what I could see was enough to make me realize something was terribly wrong. I quickly picked up Kevin's phone and scrolled through the conversation thread. What I found was a detailed discussion between Kevin, Ashley, and my parents about the logistics of my murder, planned for later that afternoon at a specific cliff location on our hiking route. Ashley, weather is perfect. Cloudy enough that visibility will be limited for other hikers. Dad, Kevin, remember, you need to be far enough away when she falls that you can claim you couldn't reach her in time. Mom, the story is that she was taking photos and slipped. Kevin tried to grab her but couldn't because of his injuries from the accident. Kevin, I know the plan. She'll be at the edge getting pictures of the lake. One push and it's over. Ashley, how long before you call 911? Kevin, at least 30 minutes. Need time to mess up the scene, make it look like I tried to climb down to reach her. Dad, and you'll be too upset to think clearly about the timeline. Trauma from watching your sister die. Mom, the insurance company will expedite the claim because of the tragic circumstances. We should have the money within 60 days. I felt physically sick reading their casual discussion of my murder. These people had raised me, claimed to love me, and were now coordinating my death like a business transaction. But the worst part was realizing how calculated their recent behavior had been. Kevin's bonding trip suggestion, their sudden affection during his hospitalization, the social media post showing our happy family, it had all been orchestrated to support their fraud scheme. I quickly forwarded the entire conversation thread to my own phone, then deleted the evidence of the forwarding from Kevin's message history. My hands were shaking as I heard him crashing through the underbrush, returning from his bathroom break. I positioned myself casually near the viewpoint, pretending to take photos while my mind raced through possible responses. Running wasn't an option. We were miles from the parking area and Kevin would easily catch me on the trail. Confronting him directly might provoke him to attack me immediately rather than waiting for the planned location. Instead, I decided to play along while documenting everything and looking for an opportunity to escape or get help. Ready to keep going? Kevin asked as he rejoined me, his demeanor trying for casual but betrayed by nervous energy. Absolutely, I replied, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. This place is beautiful. I can't wait to see the viewpoint you mentioned. As we continued hiking, I used my phone to discreetly take photos and record voice memos whenever Kevin was ahead of me on the trail. I documented our route, the time, and Kevin's increasingly agitated behavior as we approached the location where he planned to kill me. I also sent a carefully worded text to Marcus. Amazing hike with Kevin at Devil's Lake. About to see the cliff viewpoint he's been talking about. Weather getting cloudy, might lose cell service soon. The message served multiple purposes. It established my location and timeline, indicated I was with Kevin, and explained why I might not be reachable later. Something happened to me, Marcus would know exactly where to direct searchers. But I needed more than just a digital trail. I needed a way to survive what was coming and expose my family's conspiracy. The opportunity came when we reached the area Kevin had identified for my murder. It was exactly as described in their text messages. A scenic cliff overlook with a steep drop to the lake below, relatively isolated from main hiking trails, and positioned so that Kevin could claim he was too far away to prevent my accidental fall. This is incredible, I said, approaching the edge while Kevin positioned himself several feet behind me. The view is perfect for photos. I could sense Kevin's tension building as I moved closer to the cliff edge. According to their plan, this was the moment when he would rush forward and push me over, then spend 30 minutes staging the scene before calling for help. But I had spotted something Kevin hadn't noticed during his reconnaissance. A narrow ledge about 10 feet below the cliff edge, hidden from above but visible if you knew where to look. If I could time my fall correctly, I might be able to catch that ledge instead of plummeting to the lake below. Kevin, come look at this, I called, pretending to spot something interesting. You can see the whole south shore from here. He approached cautiously, probably calculating the best angle for pushing me over. When he was about 3 feet away, I made my move. Instead of waiting for him to attack, I suddenly stumbled backward toward the edge, crying out in apparent alarm. Kevin, help. Kevin instinctively lunged forward to catch me, but I grabbed his arm and used his momentum to pull him off balance. We both tumbled toward the cliff edge, but I managed to twist away and catch the hidden ledge while Kevin continued over the edge. The irony was perfect. Kevin's own murder plan had resulted in his actual death while I survived in the exact location where he had planned to kill me. I hung on the ledge for several minutes, listening to make sure there were no sounds from below. Then I carefully climbed back up to the cliff top and assessed my situation. Kevin was dead. That much was certain from the height of the fall and the rocky shore below. I was alone in a remote area with evidence of a murder plot on Kevin's phone. And my family was expecting Kevin to return with news of my tragic accident. That's when I realized I had an opportunity not just to survive, but to expose the entire conspiracy by letting my family believe their plan had succeeded. I used Kevin's phone to send a message to our family group chat. Accident happened. Sam fell from cliff. Can't reach her. Calling 911. Then I called 911 myself, reporting Kevin's fall as a hiking accident. My brother slipped and fell from the cliff. I told the dispatcher, providing our exact location. I can't see him and he's not responding to my calls. I spent the next several hours with search and rescue teams, playing the role of traumatized sister who had watched her brother fall to his death. It wasn't difficult to appear shaken. I genuinely was traumatized, just not for the reasons everyone assumed. The search teams quickly located Kevin's body and confirmed his death was consistent with an accidental fall. During the recovery operation, I overheard one of the searchers mention that Kevin's injuries suggested he had been trying to grab onto something as he fell, which supported my story that he had slipped while trying to help me. These cliff areas are dangerous in winter conditions, the lead searcher told me. Your brother probably lost his footing on a patch of ice or loose rock. It happens more often than people realize. I nodded numbly, playing my part while secretly marveling at how perfectly Kevin's own murder plot had become the cover story for his accidental death. The drive back to Cedar Falls that evening was surreal. I was supposed to be dead, Kevin was actually dead, and my family was expecting to hear that their insurance fraud scheme had succeeded. Instead, I was returning home with news that would devastate them for entirely different reasons. When I arrived at my parents' house around 10 p.m., I found the entire family gathered in the living room. They all looked up expectantly as I entered, their faces showing a mixture of anticipation and nervous excitement. Samantha! Mom exclaimed, jumping up from the couch. Thank God you're safe. When Kevin texted about an accident, we were terrified. Dad stepped forward, his expression confused. Where's Kevin? Is he okay? The moment of truth had arrived. I took a deep breath and delivered the news that would shatter their carefully planned conspiracy. Kevin's dead, I said quietly. He fell from the cliff while we were hiking. The search and rescue team recovered his body this afternoon. The silence that followed was profound. I watched my family's faces as they processed this information. Not the news they were expecting, not the outcome they had planned for. Ashley was the first to speak. What do you mean he fell? How did Kevin fall? We were at the viewpoint taking photos, I explained, sticking closely to the version I had given to authorities. Kevin got too close to the edge and slipped. I tried to grab him, but I couldn't reach him in time. Mom collapsed back onto the couch, her face pale. This can't be happening. Not Kevin. Not after everything he's been through. Dad stood frozen, staring at me as if trying to process how their plan had gone so catastrophically wrong. You're saying Kevin? Kevin is the one who fell. The search and rescue coordinator said it was probably ice or loose rocks, I continued. These accidents happen at Devil's Lake every year. Kevin just got too close to the edge. What followed was hours of what appeared to be genuine grief from my family. They had lost Kevin, not according to their plan but in the exact scenario they had designed for my death. The irony seemed lost on them in their shock and mourning. But I was watching their reactions carefully, looking for signs that they understood what had really happened. Did they suspect that their murder plot had somehow backfired? Were they wondering if I had discovered their plan and turned it against Kevin? Over the next few days, as funeral arrangements were made and insurance claims were filed for Kevin's death, I monitored my family's behavior for any indication that they suspected the truth. What I discovered was that they were proceeding with their original plan, just with a different victim. 3 days after Kevin's funeral, I overheard a conversation between my parents that revealed they were now planning to kill me at a later date, using Kevin's death as additional emotional manipulation to get me to lower my guard. We can't do anything too soon, Dad was saying to Mom in the kitchen while I was supposedly napping in the living room. It would be suspicious if Samantha died right after Kevin. We need to wait at least 6 months. But we still need the money, Mom replied. Kevin's life insurance will help with some of the debt, but it's not enough. We still need Samantha's policy. We'll figure out another method. Maybe make it look like she can't cope with losing Kevin. Suicide would be more believable now that she's experienced trauma. I realized that Kevin's death hadn't ended their insurance fraud scheme. It had just given them a new angle for murdering me. They were now planning to use grief over Kevin's death as justification for my supposed suicide. That conversation convinced me that I needed to take decisive action to expose their conspiracy before they could develop a new plan for my murder. I spent the next week gathering additional evidence while pretending to grieve Kevin's loss. I recovered the deleted text messages from Kevin's phone using data recovery software. I researched my family's financial records to document their motive. I recorded conversations where they discussed their ongoing need for insurance money. Most importantly, I consulted with a criminal defense attorney in Des Moines who specialized in insurance fraud cases. Attorney Sarah Martinez listened to my story with growing amazement and alarm. This is one of the most elaborate insurance fraud conspiracies I've ever encountered, she told me after reviewing my evidence. Your family didn't just plan to commit murder. They created an entire fictional narrative to support their claim and eliminate suspicion. What should I do? I asked. They're already planning to try again with a different method. We need to involve law enforcement immediately, she replied. But we also need to be strategic about how we present this case. Insurance fraud investigators will want ironclad evidence, and your family will claim they're being framed by a grieving sister who's not thinking clearly. Together, we developed a plan to expose my family's conspiracy while protecting me from their next murder attempt. The plan involved cooperation with both local police and insurance fraud investigators, careful documentation of their ongoing criminal discussions, and a dramatic confrontation that would force them to reveal their guilt. But first, I needed to disappear for a while to prevent them from acting on their new plan before law enforcement could intervene. I told my family I was taking bereavement leave from work to process Kevin's death and would be staying with friends in Chicago for a few weeks. This gave me time to work with investigators while staying safe from any immediate murder attempts. From my hotel room in Chicago, I coordinated with Detective James Walsh of the Cedar Falls Police Department and Agent Lisa Chong from the Iowa Insurance Fraud Bureau. They were building a case based on my evidence but needed additional proof of my family's ongoing criminal intent. We can prove they planned the original murder, Detective Walsh explained during one of our phone conferences. But unless we can show they're still actively planning to kill you, they might be able to claim the text messages were just dark humor or hypothetical discussions. That's when we developed the plan that would ultimately bring them down. I would fake my own death in a way that would expose their fraud while they tried to collect the insurance money. Agent Chong had experience with staged death investigations and knew exactly how insurance companies responded to suspicious claims. If your family tries to collect on your policy after a questionable death, they'll trigger multiple investigations that will uncover all the evidence we've collected. The plan was risky but elegant. I would stage a death that looked suspicious enough to warrant investigation but legitimate enough that my family would believe they could collect the insurance money. When they filed the claim, investigators would be waiting with evidence of their conspiracy. Detective Walsh would coordinate the fake death scene to ensure it was convincing but legally sound. Agent Chong would monitor the insurance claim process to document my family's fraud attempts. And I would remain hidden until the moment came to expose their crimes in court. But first, we needed to create a death scenario that my family would believe while giving investigators the evidence they needed to prove conspiracy. The staged death was planned for 2 weeks later at a remote cabin in Minnesota that I rented under a false name. The scenario would be a supposed suicide by overdose, motivated by grief over Kevin's death and financial stress from taking time off work. I would leave behind a suicide note expressing despair about Kevin's death and guilt about not being able to save him. The note would be genuine enough to convince my family while containing subtle clues that would alert investigators to the fraud. Detective Walsh would discover my body and ensure the scene was processed correctly. Agent Chong would monitor my family's response to news of my death. And Sarah Martinez would coordinate the legal response when they filed their insurance claim. The plan required precise timing and coordination between multiple agencies, But everyone involved was motivated by the elaborate nature of my family's conspiracy and their ongoing threat to my life. 2 weeks after Kevin's funeral, I checked into the remote Minnesota cabin and began the final phase of exposing my family's insurance fraud scheme. That night, I called my parents to tell them I was struggling emotionally and considering harming myself. The call was recorded by investigators and would later serve as evidence that my family had advance warning of my supposed suicidal state but made no effort to get me help. "I can't stop thinking about Kevin," I told them tearfully. "I keep replaying the accident and wondering if I could have saved him. Maybe if I had been faster or stronger or—" "Honey, you can't blame yourself," Mom interrupted, though her tone suggested she was pleased by my apparent breakdown. "Kevin's death was an accident. There was nothing you could have done." "I don't know if I can live with this guilt," I continued. "Maybe it would be better if I was with Kevin." Instead of expressing alarm at this suicidal statement or offering to come help me, my parents made vague suggestions about getting professional help while encouraging me to take all the time you need to process my grief. Their lack of genuine concern for my welfare would later be used as evidence of their ongoing criminal intent. The morning of my staged death, I took one final walk around the remote cabin in Minnesota where I would supposedly end my life. Detective Walsh had arrived early to coordinate the scene, bringing with him a team of specialists who would ensure every detail looked convincing while preserving evidence of the fraud. "Are you ready for this?" he asked as we reviewed the timeline one final time. I nodded, though my stomach was churning with nervous energy. My family thinks they're about to become millionaires. Instead, they're about to become defendants. The staged death scene was carefully crafted to look like a grief-induced suicide while containing subtle inconsistencies that would trigger an insurance investigation. I left behind a suicide note that expressed despair about Kevin's death while mentioning specific details only someone planning fraud would know. "I can't live with the guilt of not saving Kevin," the note read. "I keep thinking about that moment at the cliff when I could have grabbed him but was too slow. The insurance money won't bring him back, but at least it will help the family he left behind." The reference to insurance money in a suicide note was exactly the kind of detail that would raise red flags with investigators while appearing genuine to my family. Detective Walsh discovered my body that afternoon and initiated the death investigation. Within hours, news of my supposed suicide had reached my family in Cedar Falls. I watched their initial reactions from a safe house in Minneapolis, monitoring their phone calls and social media posts with law enforcement surveillance equipment. Their response was everything we had hoped for: shock mixed with poorly concealed excitement about the insurance payout. "I can't believe she's gone," Ashley posted on Facebook within hours of getting the news. "First Kevin, now Samantha. This family has been through so much tragedy." But her private text messages to friends told a different story. "It's horrible, but at least the life insurance will help Mom and Dad keep the house." Mom and Dad's conversations were even more revealing. Within 24 hours of my supposed death, they were already discussing how to approach the insurance company to expedite the claim. "We need to emphasize the tragic circumstances," Dad told Mom during a call that was being recorded by investigators. 2 deaths in the same family within 3 weeks. The insurance company will want to process this quickly to avoid seeming heartless. "Should we mention her financial stress?" Mom asked. She was worried about taking so much time off work after Kevin died. "Perfect. Financial pressure plus grief over Kevin equals clear motive for suicide. They'll pay out without much investigation." Their callous discussion of my supposed death as a financial opportunity provided exactly the evidence investigators needed to prove their criminal intent. The funeral arrangements began immediately, with my family sparing no expense for what they claimed would be a celebration of my life. They hired the most expensive funeral home in Cedar Falls, ordered elaborate floral arrangements, and planned a large memorial service that would demonstrate their grief to the community. But I was watching their financial planning more than their grief performance. Within 48 hours of my death, Dad had contacted 3 different insurance agents to begin the claims process. Mom had made appointments with financial advisors to discuss how to invest the payout. Ashley had started browsing luxury apartments online, apparently planning to move to a bigger city once the money came through. Their behavior was being documented by multiple law enforcement agencies, creating an overwhelming body of evidence that they viewed my death primarily as a financial windfall rather than a family tragedy. The day of my funeral arrived gray and cold, perfect weather for what was supposed to be a somber occasion. I positioned myself on a hillside overlooking St. Mary's Cemetery, using binoculars to watch my own funeral procession while staying hidden among the winter bare trees. The scene below was surreal beyond imagination. A long line of cars followed the hearse carrying my empty coffin, filled with family, friends, co-workers and community members who genuinely believed they were mourning my death. My family rode in the lead car, playing their roles as devastated survivors. Father McKinley from St. Mary's Catholic Church conducted the service with appropriate solemnity. "It's tragic," he said over my empty coffin, his voice carrying across the cemetery. "Such a young life lost." Samantha Brooks was a dedicated daughter, sister, and friend who contributed so much to her community. My family wept dramatically below, their performance convincing enough to fool everyone except the law enforcement officers positioned discreetly around the cemetery. Agent Chong was among the mourners, documenting their behavior and the guest list for the investigation. But the most revealing moment came during the graveside service when Dad delivered his eulogy. Instead of focusing on memories of me or expressions of love, his speech emphasized my supposed financial generosity and the security my life insurance would provide for the family. "Samantha always took care of us," he said, his voice breaking with what appeared to be emotion. "Even in death, she's making sure her family will be okay. Her life insurance policy will pay off our debts and give us the fresh start she always wanted us to have." It was a stunning admission of motive delivered in front of hundreds of witnesses who thought they were hearing a grieving father honor his daughter's memory. In reality, they were witnessing a criminal confess to insurance fraud. After the service, mourners gathered at the community center for a reception that my family had paid for with money they didn't have, confident that the insurance payout would cover their expenses. I watched from a distance as neighbors and co-workers shared memories of me while my family accepted condolences and discussed their financial future. "The life insurance will really help," I heard Mom telling a family friend. "At least Samantha's death will have some meaning if it saves the family from bankruptcy." These conversations were being recorded by undercover officers who mingled with the mourners, gathering evidence of my family's focus on financial benefits rather than emotional loss. But the most damaging evidence came 3 days after the funeral when my family met with Harold Peterson, their insurance agent, to formally file the death benefit claim. The meeting was recorded with Mr. Peterson's cooperation, as he had been contacted by investigators and agreed to assist with the fraud investigation. "I'm so sorry for your losses," Mr. Peterson said as my family settled into chairs around his conference table. 2 deaths in one family within a month. That's almost unprecedented." "It's been devastating," Dad replied. "First Kevin's accident, then Samantha's suicide. We're still in shock. The good news is that both policies are clear-cut," Mr. Peterson continued. "Kevin's accidental death policy will pay out $100,000. And Samantha's life insurance should provide $2 million, minus the suicide clause waiting period." My family exchanged glances. They had clearly researched the suicide clause and knew that most policies only excluded suicide for the first 2 years of coverage. My policy was 5 years old, so suicide wouldn't affect the payout. "How long does the claims process typically take?" Ashley asked, unable to hide her eagerness. "For amounts this large, there's usually a thorough investigation," Mr. Peterson explained. "But given the tragic circumstances and clear evidence of the causes of death, I would estimate 60 to 90 days for full payout." Dad leaned forward. "Is there anything we can do to expedite the process? We have substantial debts from Kevin's medical bills and funeral expenses." "I can mark both claims as priority due to financial hardship," Mr. Peterson offered. "That sometimes helps move things along." The meeting continued with my family providing detailed accounts of both deaths, emphasizing the accidental nature of Kevin's fall and the grief-induced nature of my suicide. They painted themselves as victims of tragic circumstances who deserved compassion from the insurance company. What they didn't know was that every word was being recorded and that Mr. Peterson was asking specific questions designed to elicit incriminating responses. "Did Samantha ever mention feeling suicidal before Kevin's death?" he asked. "Never," Mom replied firmly. "She was always the stable one in the family. Kevin's death just pushed her over the edge." "And you had no indication she might harm herself when you last spoke to her?" Dad answered this one, She called us the night before and sounded depressed, but we thought she just needed time to grieve. If we had known she was seriously considering suicide, we would have gotten her help immediately. This statement directly contradicted the recorded phone call where I had explicitly expressed suicidal thoughts and they had shown no concern. The lie would later be used as evidence of their criminal consciousness of guilt. The insurance claim was officially filed that afternoon, triggering the next phase of the law enforcement operation. Within 48 hours, investigators from multiple agencies descended on Cedar Falls to execute search warrants and make arrests. I was brought back from Minneapolis under police protection to witness the culmination of our elaborate sting operation. From an unmarked police vehicle, I watched as my family was arrested at their home on charges of insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. The shock on their faces when they realized they had been caught was profound. Ashley actually fainted when Detective Walsh read her rights. Mom kept repeating, "This can't be happening," as if denial could somehow change reality. Dad just stood in stunned silence, apparently unable to process how their perfect plan had unraveled so completely. But the real shock came when Agent Chong informed them that I was still alive and had been working with law enforcement to expose their crimes. "Samantha Brooks is not dead," she announced as they sat in the police station interview room. "She has been assisting with this investigation since discovering your plan to murder her for insurance money." The silence that followed was absolute. I watched through one-way glass as my family processed this information. Not just that their insurance fraud had failed, but that I had been actively working against them for weeks. Ashley was the first to speak. "That's impossible. We went to her funeral. We buried her." "You buried an empty coffin," Detective Walsh replied. "The entire death scene was staged to document your criminal conspiracy." Dad's face cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally resignation. "She set us up." "Actually, you set yourselves up," Agent Chong corrected. "Ms. Brooks simply gave you enough rope to hang yourselves with." The interrogations that followed revealed the full scope of their planning and their complete lack of remorse for attempting to murder me. When presented with evidence of their text messages, financial research, and recorded conversations, they initially tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding or dark humor taken out of context. But the evidence was overwhelming. The detailed planning, the staged social media campaign, the deliberate manipulation of Kevin's accident to create cover for my murder. It all painted a picture of premeditated crime motivated by pure greed. Mom was the first to break, admitting that they had planned to kill me but claiming it was only because they were desperate and saw no other way to solve their financial problems. "We weren't evil people," she sobbed during her interrogation. "We were just drowning in debt and saw the insurance money as our only salvation." "So you decided to murder your daughter," Detective Walsh stated flatly. "We thought it would be quick and painless," she replied as if that somehow justified attempted murder. "And the money would help the whole family, not just us." Ashley tried a different approach, claiming that killing me would have been a mercy because I was so depressed about Kevin's death. "She was suffering so much after Kevin died," Ashley told investigators. "In a way, we were putting her out of her misery while helping the family at the same time." Only Dad maintained his innocence throughout the interrogation process, claiming he had been manipulated by the others and never seriously intended to go through with the murder plot. But the recorded evidence contradicted all their claims of good intentions or diminished responsibility. Their own words proved they had planned my death with calculated precision and viewed it primarily as a financial transaction. The trial began 8 months later and lasted 3 weeks. I testified about discovering their plan, the staged death operation, and the psychological impact of learning that my family valued me at exactly $2 million. Dead. "They didn't just want to kill me for money," I told the jury during my victim impact statement. "They wanted to be seen as grieving heroes who had lost everything but still supported each other. They planned to use my death to generate sympathy while they spent my life insurance money." The evidence presented during the trial was overwhelming. Phone records, financial documents, recorded conversations, and the elaborate staging of Kevin's camping trip all supported the prosecution's case that this was a carefully planned murder conspiracy. Most damaging was the recording of their meeting with the insurance agent, where they had lied about my mental state and their knowledge of my suicidal thoughts while actively pursuing the money from my supposed death. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Dad and Mom were each sentenced to 25 years in prison for conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. Ashley received 20 years for her role in planning the scheme. During the sentencing hearing, I was again given the opportunity to address my family directly. This time I chose to focus on the broader impact of their crimes rather than personal betrayal. "You didn't just try to kill me," I said, looking at each of them in turn. "You betrayed everyone who mourned at my funeral, everyone who comforted you in your supposed grief, everyone who believed your lies about being victims of tragedy. You turned an entire community into unwitting participants in your fraud scheme." None of them would meet my eyes as I continued. "The worst part is that you never saw me as a person worth loving. I was just a financial asset to be liquidated when you needed money. But you failed to understand that people who are loved don't stay dead when you try to bury them." After the trial, I sold my life insurance policy and donated the proceeds to organizations that support victims of family violence and financial abuse. I also established a scholarship fund in Kevin's name, not because he deserved to be honored, but because I wanted something positive to come from his death. I left Cedar Falls permanently, building a new life in Seattle where I could start fresh without the constant reminder of my family's betrayal. I kept in touch with a few genuine friends from home, but I never returned to visit the town where I had supposedly died. 3 years later, I received a letter from Mom in prison. She claimed to have found religion and wanted my forgiveness for what they had done. The letter was full of self-serving justifications about their financial desperation and claims that they had never really intended to go through with the murder. I read the letter once, then destroyed it without responding. Some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive, and some family relationships are too toxic to rebuild. Today, I'm happily married to Marcus, who helped me heal from the psychological trauma of discovering my family's true nature. We have a daughter who will grow up knowing that family is defined by love and loyalty, not by shared DNA or financial obligation. Sometimes people ask if I regret exposing my family's crimes instead of just disappearing and starting over somewhere else. The answer is always no. By staging my own death and letting them reveal their true nature, I not only survived their murder plot but ensured they could never hurt anyone else. They planned to kill me for $2 million and spend the rest of their lives enjoying the money while playing the role of grieving family members. Instead, they're spending the rest of their lives in prison while I'm building a life worth living. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting justice and moving on to something better than anything your enemies could have destroyed. The end. Have you ever discovered that people you trusted were planning to harm you? How did you protect yourself and find justice? Share your stories of survival and resilience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more tales of turning the tables on those who underestimate us. Remember, family should value you for who you are, not for what you're worth on paper. Thank you for following Samantha's journey from intended victim to triumphant survivor. May we all find the courage to recognize our true worth and protect ourselves from those who would diminish it for their own gain.